Police Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Society is seated.
This is the case of the State of Ohio versus Brooks Skylar Richardson, case number 2017 CR 33292. Present before the court is Ms. Richardson, right?
Correct, Your Honor.
Represented by Mr. and Mr. Rickers. We have Mr. Knippen from the Prosecutor's Office, Officer Kraft from probation, or from Prosecutor's Office also. We are here today, continuation of our trial. Mr. Knippen, Ms. Kraft, is the state prepared to go forward?
We are, Your Honor.
Mr. Rickers, is the defense prepared to go forward?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Mullins, go get our jury. You may be seated. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Was everybody able to follow my instructions and admonitions over our break last night? All right, we are going to resume our testimony this morning. We left off yesterday with Mr. Fain's testimony because of some scheduling issues. We are going to interrupt his testimony, and we are going to have some other witnesses testify. The fact that some of these witnesses are being taken out of order or we're pausing, that is of no concern to you in how the evidence is presented. Mr. Knippen, Ms. Kraft, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state would call Dr. Susan Brown.
The whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
You may be seated. If you would speak loud, you may speak.
Okay.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, can you please state your full name for the record, spelling your last?
Susan Brown, B-R-O-W-N.
And just for point of clarification, at the time that you became involved in this case, were you known as Dr. Susan Allen?
Yes, I was.
Doctor, where are you employed?
The Montgomery County Coroner's Office in Dayton.
And in what capacity?
I'm a forensic pathologist.
And what is your business address?
West 3rd Street,
And is that in Dayton, Ohio?
Dayton, Ohio.
Thank you. And how long have you been so employed, Doctor?
12 years.
As a forensic pathologist, can you please explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what your duties and responsibilities are at the Montgomery County Coroner's Office?
I perform autopsies to determine cause and manner of death.
And is that what a forensic pathologist does?
Yes.
Can you explain to them what cause and manner of death is?
Cause of death is any type of injury or natural disease that leads to death. And manner of death is how that cause of death came about. You have 5 choices on a manner of death: natural, accident, suicide, homicide, or undetermined.
Thank you, Doctor. Can you please detail for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury your educational and medical background that qualifies you for your current position?
I have a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Cincinnati. I went on to medical school at Ohio University, did a residency in pathology at Ball Memorial Hospital in Muncie, Indiana, and then did additional training in forensic pathology, did a fellowship in forensic pathology at the Montgomery County Coroner's Office, which is where I'm currently employed.
Thank you, Doctor. And are you currently licensed?
Yes.
In which states?
Ohio and Indiana.
And are you board certified?
Yes, I am.
And in what areas?
Anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, hematopathology, and forensic pathology.
Thank you, Doctor. Are you a member of any professional organizations?
I'm a member of NAME, the National Association of Medical Examiners.
Doctor, in the course of your career, approximately how many autopsies have you performed?
Several thousand.
And have you previously testified, and has your testimony been accepted as expert?
Yes.
In which counties?
Montgomery County, here in Warren County, Preble County, Butler County, Greene County, Clark County.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Doctor, showing you what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit 95 for purposes of identification. Do you recognize that document?
Yes.
And can you please tell us what that is?
It's my resume.
And does that resume or curriculum vitae detail all of your relevant training and experience as it relates to your current position?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I would offer Dr. Susan Brown as an expert in the area of forensic pathology.
Does the defense wish to conduct any examination as to voir dire of the witness?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
Thank you. Doctor, I'd like to direct your attention to July 15th and July 28th of 2017. Were you still employed by the Montgomery County Coroner's Office on those dates?
Yes.
And same duties and responsibilities that you just detailed?
Yes.
And just to be clear, you are an employee of the Montgomery County Coroner's Office, correct?
Correct.
You're not an employee of the prosecutor's office,
Correct.
and you have not been paid or retained by our office to come to this trial and testify.
No.
The opinion that you offer today, would that be the same opinion that you would offer whether you're subpoenaed by the state or the defense?
Yes.
Thank you. Doctor, on those dates, did you have occasion to conduct an autopsy on skeletal remains that had been identified to you as those of baby Richardson?
Yes.
And at that time, when you first received her body, or her skeletal remains, if you will, what information did you have, if any, regarding how her remains came to be in your custody?
I had been given information from the scene investigation, which was from the Warren County Coroner's Office.
And what information was that?
They told our office that the remains of this baby, they were recovered from a backyard burial.
And doctor, during the course of your autopsy or your examination, did you at a later point receive additional information, additional collateral information?
Yes.
And what other sources of information did you receive during the course of your examination and or autopsy?
I received information from the police interview of the defendant.
And would that be both interviews, excuse me, on July 14th and July 20th?
Yes.
And doctor, is that common practice in your role as the forensic pathologist to receive collateral information?
Yes.
Doctor, where did you conduct the autopsy in this case?
In Dayton at the Montgomery County Coroner's Office.
And who all was present?
Morgue technicians and a photographer, also employees of the Montgomery County Coroner's Office.
And that was going to lead into my next question. Was there equipment present to allow you to photograph or have somebody photograph the autopsy as it was performed?
Yes.
And is that also a routine part of an autopsy?
Yes.
Doctor, if you could, can you please explain the manner in which you would typically perform an autopsy?
The first thing that we do is to take pictures to show how the decedent arrived at our facility. And then we begin to do an external examination so that we look at the outside of the body for any type of signs of natural disease or injury. And then we do an internal exam where we actually remove all of the organs and examine all of the organs for the same thing, for any kind of natural disease or injury. And during the entire process, take pictures to show any findings that we have.
Doctor, did you follow that same procedure in this case?
As much as I could.
And can you please explain what you mean by that?
Well, in this particular case, I received skeletal remains or just bones with only a small amount of soft tissue fatty tissue attached, and no internal organs. So there really was no internal exam because there were no internal organs.
So doctor, just to be clear, when you talk about in your typical procedure doing an internal examination, was there any ability to do an internal examination on the remains of baby Richardson?
No.
And would it be fair to say then that in this particular autopsy, your examination was limited to what you had, which was the skeletal remains?
Correct.
So there was an external examination and photographs?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, doctor, you mentioned photographs were taken in this case as well, is that correct?
Yes.
And would the viewing of those photographs materially assist you with your testimony today?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Doctor, I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibits 97 through 110 and ask you to take a look at those, please. Do you recognize those photographs?
Yes.
And are those the photographs that were taken of the autopsy performed on baby Richardson?
Yes.
And do those photographs clearly and accurately depict the autopsy as it was performed in your crime lab on that day?
Yes.
Now, doctor, before we start going through these photographs, just to lay a little background here, did you were aware that there were two different excavation dates in this case?
Yes.
And I previously asked you if your autopsy was performed on two dates, July 15th and July 28th.
Yes.
And did that correspond to the two different excavation dates?
Yes.
So how did that work for you? You received the initial set of remains that came in from the first excavation, correct?
Yes. So on July 14th, I received the first recovery of remains, did my exam the following day, and then on July 20th, we received a second set, and then I did my second exam on July 28th.
Thank you, doctor. Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 97 for purposes of identification. Doctor, if you will, can you tell us what is depicted in this photograph?
This picture shows what we received during the first recovery. So we have 3 bags, in addition to some loose remains that all arrived in a body bag.
And if you need to, you can use the screen up there. The bones or remains that we see right in the center of that picture, were those the loose bones that came in that you just
Yes.
referred to from the body bag?
Yes.
Is that just bones? Is there anything mixed in? What are we seeing there?
We see a collection of bones with some dirt and a little bit of fatty, soft tissue attached.
Doctor, showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 98 for purposes of identification. Can you please tell us what is depicted in that photograph?
So this is a closer look at the loose bones and little soft tissue and dirt that we received.
And is that a close-up of that center section that we saw in the first photograph?
Yes.
And this is, just to be clear, what you have from the first excavation at this point, correct?
Yes.
Doctor, showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 99 for purposes of identification. And I believe, I'm going to move the photograph for you a little bit, that is the top of the photograph, and because of the positioning of the photograph, you have to move it up a little. But what is depicted in that photograph, doctor?
So here we're looking at, after I started to go through some of those, the dirt and remains that I received, these are ribs and a portion of the vertebral column, the bony structure that protects your spinal cord. So here we're looking at ribs. And you can see that some of the ribs have darkening on the ends of them.
Thank you, doctor. Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 100 for purposes of identification. What is depicted in this photograph, doctor?
So here we're looking at one of the bags that I received during the first recovery. And in this bag, there are bones of the skull.
And doctor, we've had a little bit of testimony, but if you will, is it common at this age for the skull to be in so many pieces, if you will?
It is. So as an adult, many of these bones are all fused to form one structure, but an infant has not reached that maturity yet. So many of the bones, not only in the skull, but throughout the body, have not fused yet, so may not look like an adult bone would look.
And when you say as an infant, at one day of life, is this how you would expect the bones of an infant to look?
Yes.
Doctor, showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 101 for purposes of identification. Can you please tell us what is depicted in this photograph?
So here we see the second bag that we had received during that first recovery. And in the second bag, the bag contained dirt along with strands of hair.
Now I'm going to mess up your circle. But the strands of hair that you're referring to were located in that clump of dirt?
Yes.
And is that the sample that was ultimately forwarded to serology for analysis for DNA and gender?
Yes.
Doctor, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 102 for purposes of identification. Can you please tell us what is depicted in that photograph?
So here we have the third bag that was received during that first recovery. And in this bag we have a collection of dirt. And within that dirt is some fragments of fatty type soft tissue and numerous bones.
How did you go about trying to sift through that, if you will, to see if there was anything of evidentiary value in that pile of dirt?
Just with my hands.
Now, doctor, after you have sifted through the dirt and everything else, and I believe you indicated in State's Exhibit 98 That's what you are starting out with, correct?
Yes.
Are you making attempts to try and inventory this and determine what, if anything, you have?
I did not do an inventory. I waited for an anthropologist to come and do the inventory. I simply started going through what we had in order to recover as many bones as I could from all of the dirt.
And doctor, showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 103 for purposes of identification. When you start sifting through that pile, is this what you were able to pull out?
Yes, so this is initially what I had recovered on my first look through all of the dirt. And here we can see that there are numerous ribs and clavicles or collarbones, as well as some vertebral bones, pelvis, a little bit of fatty type soft tissue, some long bones, skull bones.
Doctor, showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 104 for purposes of identification.
Doctor, if you click the lower left, it will clear everything at one time.
Thank you.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 104 for purposes of identification. Doctor, can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph?
So here we're looking at the skull bones. There are two parietal bones, a right and left parietal bone, and these are the bones that sit right on top of your head. And then there is an occipital bone that sits right at the back of your head. And so here we have the parietal bones, the left, the right, and here is the occipital bone.
Doctor, are there in this picture any fractures depicted?
Yes, there are 3 fractures on both the right and the left parietal bones.
And I'm going to show you another picture, but from a different view. State's Exhibit 105 for purposes of identification. What are we looking at in that photograph, doctor?
So these are the same bones that we saw in the last picture, except we have now flipped them over. So we're looking at the other side, the side that would be in contact with your brain, so the inside of the bones.
And are those fracture sites better depicted when the bones are flipped?
Yes.
And can you please identify those for us?
So again, this is the left and the right parietal bones. We have a puncture type fracture on the left. There's a fracture right here and a fracture here. On the right, we have 1, 2, and this one is a little difficult to see. It's bent in, so it's sort of in the same plane with the picture and difficult to see from this angle.
Now, doctor, you are aware that baby Richardson's body was in the ground for over 2 months, correct?
Yes.
Are you able to offer any opinion as to whether those fractures are pre or post-mortem?
I don't know.
And just so everybody is clear, what is pre-mortem and what is post-mortem, doctor?
So pre-mortem meaning that it occurred before death, and post-mortem after death.
Thank you, doctor. Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 106 for purposes of identification. Doctor, can you please tell us what is depicted in that photograph?
So here we're looking at the nearly complete set of infant remains that were recovered. We have skull bones, the frontal bones, facial bones, including the jaws, the maxilla, the mandible, so the upper and lower jaws, the vertebral bones, ribs on either side of those, the upper extremities, so the long bones of both arms, the ribs, the pelvis, and the femurs, or the long bones in your thighs, and also some bones of both hands.
Is there anything at this point that is obviously missing?
There are a couple of things missing. A few ribs, a couple of vertebral bones, and the lower leg bones, the tibia and fibula, two lower leg bones on either side, and the feet and ankles.
Doctor, showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 107 for purposes of identification. Can you tell us what is depicted in that photograph?
So this is an envelope that I received during the second recovery. And this envelope is from the previous burial site in the backyard where they found the first set of remains.
And just to be clear, it was your understanding they went back out a second time and additional bones were located?
Yes.
Doctor, showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 108 for purposes of identification. Can you please tell us what is depicted in that photograph?
So this is the contents of that envelope, and inside the envelope a couple of small bones as well as a few rocks, and then one set of lower leg bones, tibia and fibula.
Doctor, showing you what's been marked in State's Exhibit 109 for purposes of identification. Can you please tell us what is depicted in that photograph?
This is just a closer look at the previous picture, so the tibia and fibula.
Doctor, once you had sorted through and identified the contents from the second excavation, were you able to add those to your prior layout of Baby Richardson?
Yes.
Showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 110 for purposes of identification. Can you please tell us what is depicted in that photograph, Doctor?
So this is essentially similar to the previous photograph where we looked at all of the bones that had been recovered, except now we have added the tibia and fibula, the lower leg bones, to the collection.
And at this point, are you still missing any of the skeletal remains?
Yeah, so the other leg, the other lower leg, feet and ankles, and still a couple of ribs and vertebral bodies.
Absent those missing bones, Doctor, does this represent a nearly complete set of skeletonized bones from Baby Richardson?
Yes.
And again, these photographs that we've gone through, Do they accurately depict the condition of baby Richardson's skeletal remains when they were provided to you?
Yes,
And at the time that you performed your autopsy on her?
yes.
Now, doctor, you had initially said that when you were completing your autopsy, as you were going through the process, that you received additional information, correct?
Yes,
And I think that you said that you received audio transcripts from the police interviews of the defendant and scene information.
yes, I did.
You also said that it's typical for you to collect that collateral information.
Yes.
And can you explain why that is?
In order to determine both cause and manner of death, all of the information leading up to the death, at the scene, during the autopsy, any toxicology, if toxicology can be performed, all of those things will make a more complete picture so that you can arrive at an accurate determination of cause and manner of death.
And doctor, separate and apart from this case, can you give the ladies and gentlemen an example of what you mean?
So, for example, if someone dies during an electrocution, specifically a low voltage, like household current, a low voltage electrocution, it is likely you will not have any findings on the body that will give you any clue that that is what happened. So if you don't get information from the scene to tell you, for example, this person was standing there using a power tool that had a frayed cord, and then in the middle of using this power tool had a sudden collapse and died, you would never be able to arrive at the accurate cause and manner of death without that extra information, because sometimes there aren't findings on the body that you're going to be able to look at the autopsy table. So it's important to look at everything.
So just to be fair, doctor, in your capacity as a forensic pathologist, or for any forensic pathologist, you do not look at the autopsy itself in a vacuum?
Correct.
Doctor, when you reviewed the statements of the defendant in this case, were there statements that she made that were significant to you in helping you to make a determination as to cause of death in this case?
Yes.
And if you will, what were the statements that she made that you found to be relevant?
The statements during the police interview were statements about sounds that the baby had made, gurgling, crying, movement, all signs of life.
Was it relevant to you that she had indicated that she thought she might have killed her baby?
Yes.
That she might have killed her baby when she squeezed it too hard?
Yes.
That her baby was alive for about 5 minutes?
Yes.
That her baby was alive before she squeezed her?
I object to the direct.
I'll sustain the objection as to the form of the question.
Doctor, when she makes statements indicating that she may have taken her daughter's life, was that relevant to you?
Yes.
When she made statements indicating that her daughter may have been alive for a period of time, was that relevant to you?
Yes.
How so?
It all indicates life.
You deal with dead bodies, correct?
Yes.
And I'm not trying to be insensitive here, but the death, the dead bodies, the processes that the bodies go through, have you ever had an experience where a deceased infant cries,
No.
gurgles,
No.
breathes,
No.
moves?
No.
Was it concerning to you when you were considering all of the information and trying to reach your opinion on cause of death, that she indicated that she may have tried to cremate her child.
Yes.
How so?
It indicates, along with the other scene information, of a deliberate attempt to try to hide or conceal the infant.
Doctor, the scene information that was provided to you regarding the backyard burial, did that factor into your opinion as to cause of death?
Yes, again, it's a deliberate attempt to hide the baby.
Now, doctor, you had indicated previously when we were talking about doing an inventory of baby Richardson's skeletal remains that you had consulted with somebody.
Yes.
And who was that?
An anthropologist, Dr. Murray.
Dr. Elizabeth Murray?
Yes.
What was your purpose in consulting with Dr. Murray?
We asked Dr. Murray to come in and do an inventory of all of the skeletal remains, give us, if she could, an estimate of the age, and also evaluate for any injury that she could see.
And was the determination or the decision to request her assistance on this case made by the Montgomery County Coroner's Office?
Yes.
Was it ever done at the request of the Sheriff's Office?
No.
Was it ever done at the request of the Prosecutor's Office?
No.
Were you ever directed to go out and find additional information by the Prosecutor's Office?
No.
When you consulted with Dr. Murray, you said you asked her to help with doing the inventory.
Yes.
And was that in fact done?
Yes.
And is that how we or you and Dr. Murray arrived at the picture that we see depicted in State's Exhibit 110?
Yes.
Was she able, you said one of your other purposes was in asking her if she could make an age determination on the skeletal remains of baby Richardson. Was she able to do that?
Yes.
And what was her estimate as to the age of baby Richardson?
Her estimate was 38 to 40 weeks.
And did you use that information in your autopsy report?
Yes.
You said that you also asked her to look at the bones and do further analysis to determine if there were any signs of trauma.
Yes.
And did she do that as well?
Yes.
And was she able to give you any indication of whether or not there was any evidence of trauma to the remains of baby Richardson that you relied upon in reaching your cause of death opinion?
She also looked at the fractures on the skull bones that we looked at in one of these pictures. And I believe she also could not make a determination as to whether they had happened before death or after death. And then she also noticed that there were some darkened areas on a few of the bones.
And I believe showing you again what's been marked as State's Exhibit 99. Are those the darkened areas that you are referring to?
Yes.
On the on the end
Yes.
of the ribs?
Yes.
Thank you, doctor. Now, Dr. Murray actually examined the bones on 2 different occasions, correct?
She did.
And when she offered you the opinion regarding trauma to the bones, was the initial opinion offered after she did her first examination?
The fracture, yes, both were after the first examination.
Okay. And then did she have an opportunity to return to your crime lab on a second date and re-examine the bones after they had dried further?
Yes.
And at that point in time, did she indicate to you that she was no longer able to offer a definitive opinion as to whether or not those were indications of thermal injury to the bones?
That's right. She had backed away from that opinion and was not sure that they had been burned, that the bones had been burned.
Now, let me ask you this, doctor. The fact that she could not give you an indication that the skull fractures were, that those occurred pre or post-mortem, or the fact that she could not give you a definitive opinion on whether or not there was any evidence of thermal injury to the bones, were you still able, based on your examination of the bones and the scene and the statements that were provided to you, able to form your own opinion as to cause of death?
Yes.
Without Dr. Murray's information, did you still feel like you had enough to go forward?
Yes.
And why is that?
Information from other sources, the scene, and also from the police interview.
Now, doctor, I had previously asked you in your testimony if you would have given the same opinion that you reached in this case to both the state and the defense if they had spoken to you about your examination and autopsy of baby Richardson. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in fact, you did have an opportunity to speak to the defense attorney in this case. Is that correct?
Yes.
And at that time, I believe he questioned you about the findings of his experts.
Correct.
And were you willing to take a look at his experts' reports?
Yes.
You are aware that he retained both Carl Schmidt and Mark Lavon to examine the skeletal remains of baby Richardson.
Correct.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
I am going to hand you a copy of the report authored by Dr. Carl Schmidt. Have you seen that report before?
Yes.
You've read its contents?
Yes.
And let me go ahead and offer you the report of Dr. Mark Lavon. Have you also seen that report before?
Yes.
And have you also read its contents?
Yes.
And in fact, have you discussed the contents of those reports with the defense attorney?
Yes.
Starting with Dr. Schmidt's report.
Your Honor, may we approach?
You may. You may continue, Ms. Graff.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, Ms. Brown, or Dr. Brown, I apologize. Let's flip to Dr. Lavon's report, okay? And I believe that is the one that you had communication with the defense about?
Yes.
And let me ask you this. Are you open to receiving new information whenever you are conducting an autopsy?
Sure,
From any source?
sure.
And when you receive additional information, if you find anything in there that's relevant or causes you to reconsider any of your initial opinions, are you willing to change your opinion accordingly?
Sure,
Okay. You looked at Dr. Lavon's report.
yes.
Was there anything contained within that report that caused you to reconsider your opinion?
No,
When you talked to the defense on this case, Dr. Lavon offered 4 opinions, correct?
yes,
And you went through each one of those with the defense?
yes,
And in looking at the report, the first thing that Dr. Lavon offers is that the skeletal remains showed no identifiable evidence of thermal injury. Did you disagree with that based on your examination?
I don't disagree with that.
Does that mean that there was no thermal injury, or you just agree that there was no evidence of thermal injury on the skeletal remains?
On the skeletal remains, I did not identify anything that I could say was thermal injury.
And again, just to be fair, in this case, all you've got are the skeletal remains, correct?
Correct.
This baby did not die in a hospital. Is that your understanding?
Yes,
This baby was not brought to you within days after her death. Is that correct?
correct.
Judge, objection.
Sustained is to the form of the question.
Doctor, if you had had baby Richardson's entire body, would you perhaps have been able to offer an opinion as to whether or not there was evidence of thermal injury to her?
Objection again, Judge. It's
Go
legal.
ahead and answer.
Yes, I would have been able to have a more complete external examination. The baby would have been intact, and certainly internal examination as well with internal organs.
So you and Dr. Lavon didn't disagree on point 1, that there's no definitive evidence of thermal injury to her bones?
Correct.
Dr. Lavon's second point was that the skeletal remains showed no identifiable evidence of violent traumatic injury. Did you agree or disagree with that statement?
I disagreed with that statement. I identified the fractures of the skull bones, the parietal bones. However, did also clarify that to say I don't know whether they were made before death or after death, but they are there.
So you documented their existence.
Yes,
You just are not able to offer an opinion as to whether they are pre or post mortem.
correct.
Dr. Lavon's third point was due to the advanced state of decomposition and lack of soft tissue for examination, there is absolutely no identifiable evidence of live birth. Do you agree or disagree, doctor?
By looking at the bones alone with no other information, there's nothing that I can say just by looking at the bones that there is a live birth.
And so again, we have agreement. By looking at the skeletal remains alone, we cannot say.
Correct.
I'm going to go back to your original testimony, doctor. Is that why a forensic pathologist does not work in a vacuum?
Yes.
Dr. Lavon's fourth point, because of the lack of identifiable violent injury and the lack of evidence of live birth, it is incorrect to state that this child died of homicidal violence of undetermined etiology. Do you agree or disagree, doctor?
I disagree.
And why is that?
Because as part of my job, I am required to look at all of the information. And so I did that. And that included the scene information and the information gathered during the police interview.
And did you share those opinions with the defense?
Yes.
Your Honor, if I may have a moment.
You may.
Doctor, in this case, did you prepare a report documenting your autopsy of baby Richardson and containing your findings in this case?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Doctor, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 96 for purposes of identification. Do you recognize that exhibit?
I do.
Can you please tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what it is?
This is my autopsy report.
And does that autopsy report contain your opinion as to the cause of death of baby Richardson?
Yes.
Doctor, based upon your education, training, and experience as a forensic pathologist, and based upon your autopsy of baby Richardson, do you have an opinion within a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to the cause of baby Richardson's death?
Yes.
And can you please state your opinion?
Homicidal violence of undetermined etiology.
And can you please explain your opinion to the jury?
So looking at all of the information, the scene, the police interview, the evaluation by the anthropologist, my autopsy evaluation, all of the evidence points to a homicide, but the exact cause of the homicide, the exact cause of death can't be determined.
Doctor, could you have obtained more information had baby Richardson been presented to you for autopsy in the days following her death?
Yes.
Sustained.
Doctor, did the actions of the defendant in any way impact your ability to make conclusions on this case?
The objection will be sustained. Let's move on, Ms. Kraft.
Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Mr. Rickers, are we prepared to go forward with cross?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Behind you. Take me 1 second here. Dr. Brown,
Yes.
I want to start my examination of you by talking about just the remains, okay?
Okay.
Based on your examination of the remains, you cannot tell us to any reasonable degree of scientific certainty that Annabelle suffered any injuries prior to her death, correct?
Based on my exam only, at the autopsy table, although I see fractures of the skull, I can't tell you whether or not they are made before death or after death.
So the answer to my question is that you can't state to any degree of reasonable scientific certainty that, let me see if I can say this correctly again, that Annabelle suffered any injuries prior to her death.
Based on only the examination of the skeletal remains, I cannot.
Thank you. Now, based on that examination, you cannot tell us to any reasonable degree of scientific certainty that Annabelle was born alive. Is that correct?
Based on just the autopsy examination alone, I cannot determine whether it was a live birth.
Dr. Brown? If Mr. Rickers asks you a yes or no question, he is entitled to a yes or no answer. Go ahead, Mr. Rickers.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, based on your examination, you cannot tell us to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that Skylar's statement to the police that Annabelle was a stillborn isn't true, correct?
Correct.
Now yet, Dr. Allen, in your report, you list homicide as the cause of death. We all heard that, correct?
Yes.
And you indicated that that's not based solely on your physical examination of Annabelle, correct?
Correct.
You indicated it's based on the police interrogations, correct?
That is one piece, yes.
You'd agree with me, Dr. Allen, that you're not a trained police officer, is that correct?
Correct.
And you're not trained in interrogation techniques, are you?
No, I'm not.
And you're not trained in the Reed technique, are you?
No.
You're not trained to identify false confessions, are you?
No.
You're not trained to identify psychological predispositions to acquiesce to authority, are you?
No.
You're a forensic pathologist, we know that. That means that your training and experience on how to examine a human corpse is related to the cause of death, correct?
The autopsy procedure. Yes.
If we focus strictly on your examination of Annabelle's remains in this case, with your actual expertise, you cannot tell us the exact cause of death in this case. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Now, you hired Dr. Beth Murray, correct?
Yes.
And so the jury understands this. She's a forensic anthropologist, correct?
She is an anthropologist.
She's not a forensic anthropologist?
She may be considered a forensic anthropologist.
You would call a forensic anthropologist to look at these remains, wouldn't you?
I'm not exactly sure what her, whether she is specifically an anthropologist or a forensic anthropologist. She does forensic work. She is an anthropologist that does forensic work.
Doctor, the purpose of hiring Dr. Murray, the forensic anthropologist, was for her to determine not only the age of Annabelle, but it was also to determine whether there was any trauma to Annabelle. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you had attached the report of Dr. Elizabeth Murray, correct?
Yes.
But it's without an addendum, isn't it?
I'm not aware of an addendum.
Well, I didn't say there was one. I'm saying there isn't one attached, correct?
Correct.
Dr. Brown, I'm going to go through some email exchanges between you and Dr. Murray, okay?
Okay.
And you've seen these.
Yes.
In fact, I think you provided them to me over a year ago.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you knew that in these emails that Dr. Murray had provided a report to the prosecution, and they weren't happy with that. Is that correct?
Oh, answer if you can.
I don't know what the exchange was between Dr. Murray and the prosecutor's office.
Doctor, I'm going to show on this device here, if I can remember how to use it. This is an email from Dr. Murray to you, and it's dated September 6, and it's 10:52 a.m. I'll put this on. Am I doing that correctly? Thank you. Which one? Oh, I got it. Thank you. She says right there, does she not? Susan, that's your first name, correct?
Yes.
The prosecutor's office seems upset with me. So she was upset after she talked to the prosecutor, correct?
This is what she writes in her email.
And so we can assume from that that they were upset with her, is that correct?
I don't know how the prosecutor's office felt.
She goes further down, right here. Apparently, my report has definitely upset their apple cart, but it is what it is. Does that tell us that they were upset with her report?
Objection, Your Honor.
I'm going to sustain the objection. Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to expert testimony, your job is to evaluate the testimony of an expert the same way you evaluate the testimony of any other witness. Sometimes I'm going to allow you to hear evidence which is not necessarily otherwise admissible, things other people say. You are allowed to consider that evidence for the purpose of what effect, if any, it has on this witness's credibility and this witness's opinions. So you are allowed to consider that for that purpose alone. You are not to consider it for the truth of the contents of that, but only what effect it has on this expert. Mr. Rickers, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. On the same day, that being September 6th, you replied to Dr. Murray, and we'll see this in 1 second here. This is at (1:54 p.m.) Sorry. You read that at the very top of the page? That's your response to her, isn't it?
Yes.
And your response says, if I'd have realized it was so crucial to their game plan, I would have done it. What's that mean?
I'm sorry. May
read
I
that first line
correct
for
that?
me?
That was her. She is sending
I'm
that to
sorry.
me. I'm sorry.
I agree. Let's go on down to September 6th again, 3 p.m. Can you read that?
Yes.
And that's your response.
Yes.
And can you read that for the jury out loud?
I also did not realize it was a crucial part of their game plan. If you would like to do this extra step and they would like for you to do this, it is fine with us. do you want to ask them if they want that to happen, or would you like for me to talk to Russell, Dr. Updegrove, about it? They have not called me about any of the findings in your report.
And then her immediate response to you, immediate being a couple hours later, go on down, please. And she says to you, and I underlined this, I'm happy to do a second exam and addendum to the report. But if I don't see it, that's what I have to say. And she goes on to further say, I ain't gonna lie to them, but I sure ain't gonna lie for them. Correct?
Yes.
When she says for them, we know it's the prosecutor, correct?
Correct.
May I 1 second, Your Honor?
You may.
Now, you're aware that she was happy to do a second or third exam of these remains and do an addendum to her report, are you not?
That's what she says.
So you are aware that she was willing to do?
Yes, I am.
And to do an addendum?
Yes.
And you're aware that, I'm going to show you, this is an email between Mr. Knippen and Dr. Murray.
Your Honor, I'm going to object and ask to approach.
You may. Mr. Rickers, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Allen, I'm going to show you an email between Dr. Murray and Mr. Knippen, okay? And I only want to look at the highlighted portion here for the purposes of your testimony today. That says, this is from Mr. Knippen to Dr. Murray. If it is now your opinion that you do not believe that there is any evidence to suggest that the bones were burned, I will need you to do an addendum to your report with this additional information so it can be provided to defense counsel. We never got that report, right?
I did not get a report.
And from the emails that we've covered, it was clear that she would have been more than happy to do another exam to help you, to come to a right conclusion, correct? It's clear that she wanted to do another exam. Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. And just so I'm clear, neither one of you, meaning Dr. Murray and you, Dr. Brown, really didn't understand that the burning was a big part of their case, correct?
I was not aware of that. No.
All right. Let's talk about your report. Let me start over here. You indicated that you can't do this in a vacuum. That's why you looked at the interrogations of Skylar, correct?
Yes.
And I assume you looked at the photos of the grave.
I did not have any photos of the grave provided.
Did you have any photos whatsoever of the backyard?
No.
You didn't think it was important?
I didn't have that provided to me.
All right. Again, concentrating on the skull and the fractures that you just told us when Ms. Kraft was questioning you. You don't know whether those fractures happened before or after. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, as I recall your testimony, and we've talked about it on my cross, is that you hired Dr. Murray not only to determine the age of Annabelle, but you also retained her to determine if there was any trauma, correct?
Correct.
And that she didn't have that opportunity, did she? She didn't have that opportunity to microscopically examine that fracture, did she?
She did not microscopically examine the fracture. She grossly, with her eyes, examined the remains.
Same as you. You use your eyes.
Correct.
You don't even have the type of microscope at your office to examine those fractures closely, do you?
I do not have a dissecting microscope.
Now, you remember when I sent to you a number of reports. I think you've gone over some of those with Ms. Kraft, is that right?
Yes.
One of those reports is from Dr. Latham. Remember that?
Yes.
Dr. Latham was hired by the prosecutors. You know that?
Yes.
Did they provide you with Dr. Latham's report?
I don't remember who provided me with the report.
Well, did you get more than one report of Dr. Latham?
I don't recall.
Well, we know that at least I provided it to you, correct?
Yes.
And you read it.
Yes.
And Dr. Lavon, Dr. Latham indicates in her report, if you remember, that there were no signs of homicidal trauma to those remains, correct? She doesn't use homicidal, she uses no trauma to those remains that are a result of any violence. Is that correct?
Well, I don't remember exactly how it reads, but yes, that is what she indicated.
And she is a trained forensic anthropologist, correct? You don't know?
I have had no contact with Dr. Latham. I read her report. I'm sure she's a trained anthropologist.
Thank you. And again, you said you were open in this investigation to fill in the vacuum. Why isn't that part of your report? Why isn't Dr. Latham's report, Dr. Latham, who was hired by the prosecution, why isn't that an addendum to your report? Showing that those fractures were not a result of any homicidal injury. Why is it?
May I reference my report?
You can reference it here. I'll put it up on the board.
What I reference in my report in terms of the fractures is that I can't determine if they are pre or post-mortem.
Someone else, you hired Dr. Murray originally, the forensic pathologist, to determine what's the cause of the trauma. Did you not? It's in her report that you did. Yes?
That was one of the reasons that we hired her.
Right.
Yes.
But she didn't get that opportunity, did she? She didn't microscopically look at those fractures, did she?
She did not.
Right. And so, your report and what you testified to when Ms. Kraft was talking to you is that you don't know whether those fractures are before or after, right?
Correct.
Pre, post-mortem, right?
Correct.
Yet you were given a report by Dr. Latham, hired by the prosecution, that said that those fractures had nothing to do with any death. Why didn't you attach that to your report? Why didn't you make an addendum?
She was not hired by our office and thus providing the report to me. The report was provided to the prosecutor's office.
But then I provided it to you. Did you check with the prosecutors and say, is this true? You hired Dr. Latham and you didn't send me the report? Did you do that? Did you do that?
I do not recall whether the prosecutor provided the report to me.
Well, did you call them after I provided it to you?
I don't recall that I called them.
But that report indicates that instead of Perry, there wasn't any question. Those fractures were post-mortem. No question.
According to Dr. Latham, they are post-mortem.
So why did you come in here and tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that I can't tell whether the fractures were before or after death? When you have Dr. Latham's report.
I'm providing the jury with my opinion, which was I couldn't tell.
I apologize, and I hate to be beating a dead horse, but you just told us through the examination conducted by Ms. Kraft that you're open to other evidence. Well, there's other evidence, right? Dr. Latham's report is other evidence, and you didn't bother to attach that as an addendum to your report, did you?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
Overruled. Go ahead.
I did not attach a copy of Dr. Latham's report to my report.
I apologize, Dr. Brown. I should have stated it this way. You didn't write an addendum to attach to your original report to say that based on Dr. Latham's report that any fractures that you observed were post-mortem.
Correct.
Thank you. Just so the jury is clear on this, Dr. Allen Brown, you already testified that you don't have the microscope or whatever we call it to be able to examine those bones, correct?
We do not have a dissecting microscope.
And so this opinion of yours was based on eyeballing the fractures?
Yes.
You eyeballed, I'm sorry, did you say?
Yes.
Oh. And yet, you had to bring in Dr. Murray, a forensic anthropologist, and the prosecution had to bring in a forensic anthropologist to determine whether there was any trauma, correct? Yes or no?
Yes.
And the reason we had to bring in forensic anthropologists is because they're trained to examine fractures like that to determine whether or not they contributed to death or whether they were after death. Correct? Yes or no?
Yes.
The first time that Dr. Murray, the forensic anthropologist, came to examine those bones was July 20th, correct?
Yes.
And as a result of her opinion, which we now know was incorrect, that being that the bones were charred, but as a result of that, your office, through, I believe it was Dr. Updegrove, because he testified to this 2 days ago, called Detective Fain and said that the forensic anthropologist said that the remains had been burned. Remember that? Yes or no? It's very simple.
I believe that he called, yes.
And told the detective that the bones, the remains of Annabelle, had been burned.
Yes.
Right? Oh, and by the way, that reminds me, when the prosecutor was showing you these remains, all these remains that you put of Annabelle up there, and you circled I think it was part of the rib bones, that they looked dark and stuff. That was because those remains of Annabelle were wet, correct?
I don't know why they were darkened.
Didn't you have a conversation with Dr. Murray when she came back on August 17th? She did, right?
Yes.
She came back on August 17th, and she says, oh, I can no longer say that the remains were burned. Didn't she say that to you?
Yes.
Didn't she say, you and I looked at that back on July 20th, and boy, it looked kind of burned, but I wasn't sure, but now I can't say it because they're no longer wet. Didn't she say that?
I don't recall that she said they were no longer wet. She said that they looked different.
That they were dry. Did she say that?
I don't recall if she said they were dry.
I got it. So, we do know, though, that because of that opinion that was corrected later, that information was passed on to Detective Fain, correct?
Yes.
We also know that as a result of that opinion, which later turned out to be wrong, that led to a second search of the residence, meaning the yard and the gravesite, correct?
Yes.
And we also know that also led to the second interrogation of Skylar, correct?
Yes.
All right. Let's go to, on your report, right here. Reported history from police interview of attempted incineration. All right? This is the topic we're going to cover now. Now, I believe you indicated, since you don't, when you do your investigation, you don't do these in vacuums, right?
Yes.
And as I understand it, you relied on not only the remains of Annabelle that you had put in some sort of order, but also on these police interrogations, correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I missed the first part of
I
what you said.
apologize if I'm not speaking loudly enough. I said you indicated that you came to your conclusions, how about that? Based on your putting together the skeletal remains, right?
Yes.
The police interrogations
Yes.
and reports of the scene, is that what I heard?
Yes.
Anything else? Did you consider anything else?
Information about the age determination from the anthropologist.
Okay, Dr. Murray, when looking at the bones, did a certain measurement which told her the approximate gestation age of the fetus. Is that correct?
Correct.
Anything else?
No.
That's it.
Yes.
Okay. Now, again, we're going to the topic of attempted incineration. And you are aware, like most of the world, that when Skylar was indicted on August 4th, that prosecutor's office held a press conference for 30 minutes or so and announced to the world that not only did...
Sustained. Jury will disregard that question.
So, let's, again, staying on topic here, the attempted incineration. On September 6th, when we went through these emails earlier in your examination by me, we knew that the prosecutor wasn't happy with Dr. Murray's report, correct? Because she changed her opinion about the burn, correct?
That's what it sounds like from the emails.
And again, you, well, let's talk about the fact that the anthropologists that have been hired, there were 3 of them. We had Dr. Murray, we have Dr. Latham, hired by the prosecutor, and we have Dr. Sims, who was hired by us. All 3 of them agree that the remains were not burned, correct?
Correct.
Now, I didn't quite understand when, not because, it might be because of my hearing, and I'm not kidding, I have a hard time sometimes hearing things. When Ms. Kraft was questioning you, I thought you said that you either, did you review the video? Is that what you did to come to your conclusions? The video of the interrogation of Skylar?
I did two things, looked at both the video along with the written transcript.
Now, Doctor, I'm going to show you a few clips. I believe it's from the second interview. Let me take this off the board here for a minute. And when we see all these clips,
See what, Mr. Rickers, why don't we take a break so that we can get the technical aspects of this all set up. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break for the morning. Remember what I have previously told you. Do not begin thinking about how this case should come out or begin talking about the case amongst yourselves. We're going to take about a 15-minute break. We will be back here ready to go at 5 till. We are on the record outside the presence of the jury. Do we want to talk about objections that we discussed at sidebar now, or you want to wait until after the examination is complete?
We can wait until examination is complete, Your Honor.
Okay, we'll be back at 5 till.
5 till, Your Honor.
Yes.